Okay, here we go. Let me see to make sure. Yes. So I say it again. I will give you a presentation during which you can on chat write comments, presentation that then we will deal with after the presentation. And today, the second day of our program, we're going to focus on the man that is the, well, maybe even unwilling beginning of the whole Franciscan movement. I say that because from his own writing, it wasn't clear that he wanted to start something, but he had to face the reality that once he started doing, living in a different way, other people actually joined him. And once they joined him, they had to get organized, and that is the beginning of a movement. But we will focus on that man, Francis, that is known as Saint Francis of Assisi. I would say I will not focus on Saint Francis because that is what he became after he died. I will focus on the man that from a wannabe knight became, in his own words, Brother Francis. I will not give you, and that would be impossible or an insult, to try to give you a whole life of Francis of Assisi within an hour. What I want to focus on is what in his life is really important, very relevant in the foundation of what I call the Franciscan movement. And so the first thing I want to focus on, 2 weeks ago, in the historical background, I told you what the forces were in presence, the change in the society, the change of regime, change of economy. So here we are in the early 1200s, and that man, Francis, is in his early 20s. And how is he doing? Well, he is the son of a very successful merchant, businessman in the cloth industry, which means traveling also to France and even what is now Belgium for cloth, good cloth, precious cloth. And most likely he traveled with his father. But in the time that we're focusing on, in the early 1200, from the document, he's getting tired of that father's business. Okay, he was also, I think I mentioned it 2 weeks ago, a very successful party guy, Playboy style. We're not going to go dig into that, but he's tired of that too from the document at some point. What is more important is that he participated in violent fights, conflicts between his side of the town and the other side of the town, between the upcoming middle class of the business people and the traditional uh, land owners, nobility, and also military class. And after um, kicking the upper class, the old nobility, out of Assisi, actually they came back and there was a big battle. And Francis was in the battle. Why was it in the battle? Because that was part of the dream. Was it his dream? Was it his father's dream? Maybe both. To go in the upper class, not just being a rich business guy, but to be part of the nobility. You have to show some prowess that would show on a battlefield. So Francis was there, and there was a big battle between the nobility of Assisi and their friends from Perugia coming back. And well, they lost the battle. The interesting thing is that Francis was not killed, which also means he must have hurt other people, and then was taken into captivity by the winners in Perugia. He stayed there in not very healthy and pleasant condition for about a year before the father paid the ransom, and Francis came back to Assisi sick, physically sick, but also what we call today post-traumatic stress disorder, which is certainly understandable because fighting and battles in that time were always direct and bloody. He still tried a little bit to move with the dream of knighthood, but it didn't go very well. I'm not going to get into detail. Where I'm now in like 1200, 04, 05, is that there is some sort of a peace in the city of Assisi between the two factions, but he is really depressed. And when I read the documents, I can see somebody who's wondering where he's going, what is life, and maybe really what does it mean to be human? And that's where I take it at this point. So unexpectedly, he has an experience, and I said unexpectedly because I'm basing myself and what I tell you on the documents, and in this case on Francis's writing. He wrote what we call a testament at the end of his life. And unexpectedly, he had a life-changing experience with people that were outside of Assisi. And as I said 2 weeks ago, they were outside of Assisi because they were actually not allowed to be in Assisi or able to be in Assisi. And they were definitely totally outcast because they had an illness that people were so scared of and not able to deal with. And we call it leprosy. So if I try to show you something. Here we go. That is not exactly what I wanted to show you, but let me try again. Okay. No, so I'll do it in a different way. Here we go. That should go. Can you see that text? The Lord gave me, Brother Francis.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
This is in English translation, the beginning of that text that he wrote at the very end of his life, to see how the whole journey had been based on that experience. Now, it's true that he's using the language of his time, and the language of his time, when you write down, is pretty much, I would say, with religious vocabulary, like to do penance, and I was in sins. But if you read that, what he really says is that all of a sudden and unexpectedly, he didn't plan it, he found himself among people with leprosy. And that is the place where he never wanted to be. He said he uses very tasty category, saying it was for him too bitter to even see people with leprosy, which is good. It's true when you see people with leprosy, at least pictures, you see that they're so deformed. And something happened when eventually he really was among them and agreed to be with them. He says, I did mercy with them. That is the experience. And to do mercy with, it's actually a reminiscence of the gospel that he knows, the story in the gospel of the Good Samaritan. He had a relationship with people he didn't want to have relationship with, and a relationship of mercy, misericordia, compassion, and that turned his life. Now, what was that really an impressive thing? Yes, it was. If I show you, let's see, I don't have it here. Here's a picture. This is a modern picture that actually positioned. In the background, you have the city of Assisi. The people with leprosy were outcast because they were contagious. People were really afraid. And so Crazy Francis.
We still see the text. We don't see that picture.
Okay. You can see, you see the text, you don't see the picture, so I'll get rid of. Now, okay, the shared glow. Now, do you see this picture?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, that's a modern picture of Francis cleaning up, taking care of a man with leprosy who is embarrassed, and rightly so, because they really were not supposed to be in contact with other people. When you would be diagnosed in the city with leprosy, and leprosy could be anything, skin disease, there was a whole funeral liturgy, and the priest would send the person away with really hard words, condemning the person to be like a walking dead outside of the society. I forbid you to ever enter anything. I forbid you to leave your house unless dressed in a recognizable garb. I forbid you to wash your hands or to launder anything or to drink of any stream or fountain. I forbid you to touch anything you buy or barter for until you becomes your own. And there is a whole list of things like that. I forbid you to touch any child or to give them anything. So once you diagnosed and condemned with leprosy, you are outcast. In this time of the pandemic, I have to think of the fact that, yes, what if today you hear that somebody that you know has coronavirus, COVID-19, and how, and it happens to me, what will I handle that? Well, today we have more scientific data that at the time of Francis, even though some people don't really deal with those scientific data, but that's another talk. Francis was totally fearless. Why was he fearless with the people with leprosy? I have only one explanation that helps me today. He was in such a bad shape. He felt so bad about his life that maybe his vulnerability connected him with the people who were so vulnerable, the most vulnerable of his time, the people with leprosy.
Wow.
As a result, he made contact with them. And when he say that he did mercy, it's an action like this, he was in contact with them. He actually not only gave the people with leprosy something, but he received something from them. Obviously, when he said that he went back to Assisi with a sweetness, a happiness that he had never experienced before. And then he said that after a little while, he just left Assisi. He wanted to be outside of Assisi with the people, relating to people who had no access to the city. So that's a foundational and fundamental experience that I would say call under the word that Francis uses in Latin, Misericordia, but in modern English, compassion. So the whole Franciscan movement with Francis start with an experience of compassion. It's a relational experience, and it's to get out of your security, vulnerability bubble toward others who are, as we are, vulnerable and sometimes more. I think I couldn't insist more that it is the starting point. And it is the starting point that Francis puts very clearly in his testament. Now, what after that? I want to stop sharing. Okay. Here we go back. Can you see me
Yes.
on your screen? Okay. So Francis said that experience was life-changing. But what after that? Well, what after that, he went into I would say, a spiritual journey. And the spiritual journey actually was helped by the fact that he was sick and tired of Assisi and wanted to leave Assisi. But what was his alternative? Well, in that time, in those days, there was an alternative, which is not possible exactly the same way today. When he says, I leave Assisi, I leave the system of Assisi, so where do you go? Well, there is another system, and it's the church. The church system. As we say today, there is the canon law, the law of the church. Yes, there was already at the time, but unlike today, the law of the church was an alternative law. We cannot today say, I'm sick and tired of the law of the United States. I'm going to just put myself under the law of the church. Well, that's not working. That will not work, and we know it. But at the time of Francis, it did. So that's what he did, and he put himself into the jurisdiction of the church, of the Bishop of Assisi, and started working. He was actually helping at the restoration of churches. And in doing so, he was in touch, in contact with some images. And one image that has become very famous in the Franciscan tradition is this one. Okay, you don't see it. You don't see it. I don't know what it is, but finally you see it, right? It's an image of the crucifix Jesus with characters all around. The picture, it actually tells the whole story of Jesus's passion. And it shows someone who is not actually tortured but already past all that, and with wide open eyes and wide open arms, welcoming, inviting. That artifacts that was in existence at the time of Francis and is still there in Assisi is to be traditionally taken as the one who really inspired Francis to go beyond his deeper in his experience after the people with leprosy. Focusing on what? Well, focusing on the fact that caring and loving other people goes beyond suffering and death. Okay. But I just said, what about that position with the church? And I have been asked also, well, was everybody a Christian at the time of Francis? Yes, everybody was a Christian. A Catholic? Well, at the time of Francis, the Christian church had been already divided into West and East. The Western part, the Roman church, that then calls itself Catholic, which in Greek means universal, and the Eastern part that calls itself Orthodox, of the right doctrine. They had been fighting for quite a while because of government. The Roman church wanted to control everything, and the Eastern church said, no, we are like a federation or a confederation of different churches in different cultures. Well, they broke up before Francis, and now he is in the Roman Catholic Church. There is no question about that. Where there are questions at the time of Francis is that the hierarchy, the clergy of the church, is not really much in contact with the people, the real people, the working people. And at the time of Francis, they are trying to develop their own connection with the good news that we call the gospel, the books relating what happened with Jesus 1,200 years before them, 200 years before us. It is not an easy issue because as soon at the time as you start doing something without asking permission from the head of the hierarchy, you are suspected of being rebellious or not disciplined. And there are other movements at the time that have been doing similar things to what Francis did and did with his companions, but some went out, some were condemned, and here we have the Francis's movement that succeeded in staying in. What Francis says in his testament, how he succeeded in staying in, is that he never questioned any validity, never chastised indignity of the clergy. He always did one thing, is that the clergy is in charge of delivering the word and the word and the body and blood of our Lord Jesus Christ, and that's all I want. So we could go deeper in that and take longer time, but just in a few words to explain how Francis succeeded not being outcast, not being branded as a heretic. He, and later soon with his movement. What they did, and this is the most important, because I said I want to focus on how the movement that developed from Francis and people who joined him, how did that develop an alternative and inclusive society? Well, they developed actually what I would call today alternative economics. If you remember what I said 2 weeks ago, it was the development of the monetary system, the business world. Well, basically, I would say the birth of capitalism, not necessarily as we know it today, but it started then. And Francis got tired of that, left that, but then leaving that and then other people joining him, you still are facing the reality, how do you make a living day after day? What do? You sit on your butt and you expect things to come to you? No, he developed and was joined by others an alternative economic system. The base of that, and this for the world is totally crazy. And if you don't want to use crazy, you can at least say countercultural. We have to work to make a living. And how do we work? So what matters is not what do we do, but how do we do it? And what they developed is work is a service. What do you mean a service? Yes, a service. In whatever we do, they said, Francis said, we are serving others. That's why they call themselves lesser, minor, minor in Latin. Why? Because in developing a work world with the idea that we are serving each other and it's mutual all over, it actually developed a different kind of society. He and the others followed. He wants to be a brother, not a competitor. And we will see in 2 weeks what happened with women join as sisters. Francis had its experience with enough experience with money. And he didn't want having anything else to do with it anymore. I will be very crude, but just quoting, for Francis, money was the devil's shit. The devil's shit. Devil, diabolos in Greek, means the divider. He had experienced too much that money was actually dividing people. And he did not want that anymore. Well, I have to laugh because recently I read that our dear Pope Francis had an interesting sentence that is, the devil enters through the wallet. Not that I want to say that our wallet is shit, but the idea is the same thing. We have to be careful, and because we have to deal with money, we live in a monetary system, but we have to remain aware that it is an entrance to division, to the divider. So that's an important thing, and we will get back to that in the next sessions we have together. But they developed a alternative economy that attracted people, particularly the people who were not really included into the brand new business monetary system. And it's going to be interesting to see also how the women will handle that. Because I told you 2 weeks ago that the women were not part of the business world, were not part of the public life. And so when women get in, how will they handle that new pre-capitalism society? But so that is something that I put here. Now, when I continue, another important point in the life of Francis is also that, and it's connected, since he didn't want to have a world of competition. He wanted to have people relating as brothers and sisters, serving each other and making their livelihood like that. There is something that, an issue that comes immediately, and the issue is, what about conflict? What about conflicts? They're always in our life. And what do we do with it? So in his testament, again, talking of the beginning, I'm trying to fix what I'm seeing here. And I don't know why it's not exactly what I'm expecting. Anyway, so I'm continuing. He says that part of their life was to bring peace. Well, bringing peace is actually solving conflicts. And we have stories about that. And I would mention two that I think are most relevant. One is something that you may have if you have some knowledge or you read a few things about Francis. One is actually the famous story of Francis and a wolf, the wolf of Gubbio. And actually the story that we don't know exactly when and how it happened, but there is a tradition. It's more than Francis and the wolf. It's a story of a conflict in the city of Gubbio between the citizens of Gubbio and a devastating wolf around. And Francis got involved in that and was able to make peace between the wolf and the people of Gubbio. How did he do that? Well, he got involved. He got involved unarmed. He got involved with a companion, so not alone. He's not the big hero. And he went and listened to both sides of the conflict. Realized that the wolf was doing things that were unacceptable, but for reasons that he could understand. He was starving. So he told the wolf, okay, if we can reach a deal with the people of Gubbio, the city, that you will not be starving anymore, will you stop doing what you're doing? It's like a fairy tale, but actually the content is very real. And the wolf actually topped hand and paw with Francis and said, yes, if I'm not starving, I will stop going after beast and people. So Francis goes back with the wolf to the city and then confront the people of Assisi and saying, you're not as you know, righteous as you think you are, if you would allow the wolf, and I would even extend beyond the wolf, to have what they need, you wouldn't be suffering the retaliation that you are suffering. The story, the fairy tale that you can read in the Little Flowers of Francis, but that is very inspiring, is that Francis succeeded in reconciling the two parties actually through making justice. So the people of Gubbio were not righteous, and the wolf was not totally bad. He succeeded in actually doing justice and reconnecting the two parties. And the story says that the wolf became actually a friend of Gubbio and would come and would get food from the people in the city. And the end of the story that is very touching is that when the wolf died, the whole city mourned. They felt bad. At the beginning of the story, they couldn't stand, they would like to kill the wolf. At the end of the story, they felt bad. They had lost a friend. Francis, in his strategy of non-violent conflict resolution, had succeeded in making two parts that were in opposition friends. Another episode of Francis in peacemaking that is not so good is Francis becoming very upset with the war between the Christian world and the Muslim world. Basically, between the army of crusaders and the army of Muslims. That had been going on actually for a couple of centuries already, under the pretext of regaining for the Christian the control of Jerusalem, the holy city. I will not go deeper and deeper and deeper in that, but there were other political and economic issues as usual. Control of the commerce with the East, the cloth, the silk from China, the spices from India, etc. But Francis wants again to get involved in the conflict. And here he goes to the Middle East and starts to work between the two. What is very interesting here is that the Christian side mocked him and refused to work toward a reconciliation. Basically, the beginning of a saying, a good Muslim is a dead Muslim. Francis did not give up. He succeeded, and it's unbelievable in a way, he succeeded to get to the head of the Muslim army and spent some time, about 3 weeks from the documents, talking and making actually relation and friendship. And Francis came back out of that, not solving the crusade, but actually having seen that the Muslims are not the bad people that in the Christian world people are saying they are. He was actually very impressed by their deep faith. So that's another point in the development of the Franciscan movement with Francis. There are two things that I would like to point at now, is also all that with Francis is based on two elements that he discovered after his experience with the people with leprosy. Two elements that for him synthesize what being a Christian means, or what the life of Jesus means. One thing is that he's totally impressed with the quality, the reverence of God for humankind, for humanity. What in Christian world is called the incarnation. God becomes flesh. God becomes a human being. If you believe that, that means that the human being has a wonderful value, even a divine value. And the other thing that he focuses on is that the love that is showed in Jesus's life is not being killed by anything, including a torture and an execution. That love is the number one value and is stronger than anything else. He will celebrate that. He will celebrate the birthday of Jesus, what we celebrate, I mean, it's a holiday in the Christian world, Christmas, every year. He will celebrate that, but he will celebrate that in a very particular way. He wants to celebrate it in reenacting the conditions when we read in the gospel that Jesus was born in the condition of a homeless immigrant parents. That's what he wants to experience in Greccio, that little town in the Rieti Valley, central Italy. To feel what it must have been. Yeah. So instead of a big party with balloons, and he went with a few people who were inclined to do so in the middle of the woods and see how it was. In the darkness, cold, with an ox and a donkey. Crazy. Well, that's a characteristic of Francis. He is crazy. You always love to say that he was a fool. Well, it's a kind of fool that for me is always an interesting, attracting fool. The Passion, he did not anticipate how he would actually experience it, but he did. During a retreat on Mount Laverna, he was tortured. He was psychologically tortured by the fact that the crusade was still going on, and he had made friendship with the Sultan there. And new people in his movement were not exactly understanding what he was doing, and the early companions were doing, and that was torturing him. But he came to the conclusion, all we can do is to live what we have decided to live, what we have been called to live. We cannot change the others. We can only be faithful to what we do. That's when actually, very mysteriously, he got in his body the marks of the passion of Jesus. You know, wounds in his hands, in his feet, in his side, according to what the story in the gospel is. Nobody saw that. Nobody knows how it happened. Pages of scholars have been written, and that is, we will never, I don't think, and it's not the point, to understand how did it happen. What matters is, what does it mean? That means that he understood that passion has two sides. One side is love, the other side is suffering, and the side with love overcome the suffering. At the end of his life, and I will end with this, totally reconciled, he composed a beautiful song to praise God that we know as the Canticle of the Creatures or the Canticle of Brother's Son. It's a major piece of literature, actually the oldest piece in Italian literature we have. It's in Old Italian, in Umbrian, and that actually is what is his poetic testament, praising God for all creation, praising God for our human life, particularly when we go through conflicts and illness, and even praising God for the passage into eternal life that he calls sister bodily death. Bodily death. So that is in 1 hour going over the life of Francis. This is not really a biography of Francis, but I wanted to, as I said at the beginning, to focus on important points that remain fundamental in the Franciscan movement. In the next, in 2 weeks, we will actually turn to the coming of women in that movement and what they bring. And then at the end, we will see and how is the movement, what is common in all the people, religious or lay people, men, women, but little by little, we are building on that. And at this point, I should take a look at what I find in the chat. And I see Sarah is saying, I love that it's not crazy, it's countercultural. Yes, that's true. But for the culture, it's crazy. But when we know that's what we want to live and we're called to live, it's yes. Okay. Can you see me again?
Yes.
Okay. The internet sometimes doesn't like what is called countercultural, I guess. Anyway, going back to the chat, unfortunately, now everything that was written there has disappeared. So I would say, if you want to say something, I see something just right now. Did Francis avoid questioning the clergy to avoid conflict, or because he really believed in their interpretation of the gospel and respected their authority? It's actually in between those two. I think Francis was much aware that, and it was part of the way he wanted to live, not enter into competition and conflict. That's one thing. The second thing, he was aware that if he would enter into conflictual conversation with the clergy, it would not turn to his advantage. It's true. If you want to be in conflict with someone, before you start, make sure that you have more power than the other side. In the end, I do think that actually Francis had a very smart reaction to the clergy in avoiding the issue of anything power and wealth, but saying, you are actually ministers of things that we people need. Deliver the gospel and the sacraments. That's all we are asking, and that's all I want to talk about. And we see that in several of Francis's writings. So you could say he avoids the conflict with the clergy. Yes, he does. But on the other hand, he actually puts the clergy in front of its responsibility. Your existence is not about power or wealth. It's about delivering, serving, ministering to people, something that is for life. Okay, I'm reading something else, not so much a question as an observation. Seems like the Buddha saw suffering and thought the resolution is to withdraw, whereas Francis saw suffering and ran toward it. Yes, but I think at some point the Buddha also focused on compassion, and because that is what it's all about. Francis, with the people with leprosy, was a suffering Francis. And then he embraced, and I'm not saying physically embraced, the condition. He said, these are people suffering as well. We have the suffering in common. And how can we improve each other's situation? I don't think he thought of the people with leprosy would improve his situation, but knowing how bad he was feeling, that he didn't see where his life was going, and seeing other human beings whose life had been terminated, he felt close to them. And then something positive came out of it. So the reality of compassion, that he says it's to do something. He said to do mercy with, to do compassion. It's not to have compassion, to have pity, to have mercy. It's to do. Even if it doesn't sound right in English, it's a relationship. And I think in whatever, if we're concerned with other people, if we're concerned with what we call today social justice, that is an important point. Do we do things for other people? Do we do it for them? Do we do it to them? Or do we do it with them? With means a two-way relation. If I teach as a teacher, do I teach to or do I teach with? My old experience, and there are some here in this session who were in the classroom with me, my experience is while I was giving to the students, I received a lot from them. And that made me happier. That made me more lively. If I was only delivering knowledge, I don't think that after a few years I wouldn't have been bored with that. But entering in relationship with the students in the classroom, and I'm taking that example because it's mine, entering in relationship with the students in the classroom, talking, but as much listening, that makes it totally different. And I can say I had a student who took the same class 3 years in a row. And she could not believe that the class was different each year. And I said, it's because the students are different. It's relationship. Okay. Without money, how did Francis and the others live? What did they do for food, shelter, clothes? They worked. They worked. They worked, and some of them were actually very skilled at competence. I mean, we don't have enough time to get into documents, but they are there. They joined the movement with skills, and they continued. The difference is that with Francis, it's going to change, but Francis at the beginning was so opposed to that money, that young money, that they accepted, in exchange for their work, they accepted everything but money. And so they accepted food, they accepted clothes, they accepted anything that they needed. And obviously they survived. And sometimes I wonder nowadays if money has limitations, that sometimes more value is in the service that we can give to each other. One has a skill and do something for another, and in exchange, somebody has another skill to do something for another. And in that sense, I would rejoin Francis that we live in a monetary system, fine. We don't even use coins anymore. With the pandemic, everywhere we go, we don't have coins. There is, lack of coins. So do whatever, notes, plastic. But money in whatever form is not the divinity. It's something, it's a mean of exchange, but it is not the only one. There were means of exchange before money, and nowadays, I do believe that there are means of exchange that are not money. We can volunteer. Well, you said, well, that doesn't bring money. No, it doesn't bring money, but you can get some volunteering in exchange for something that you need. You can volunteer and somebody will give you a meal. That's very similar to what happened to Francis and the companions. We shouldn't put the number one value where it doesn't belong. Okay. What did they do? Well, they never ran naked, except when Francis wanted to. That's another story. He wanted to be naked sometimes. An important story, actually. But that's different. Okay, so here we are. Is it for today? Are you satisfied for today? Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Mhm.
Good.
Good. It was good.
You can always, as I said, you can always send me email messages with other comments, other questions, requests. Maybe I should add something because Terry has sent me a message. Were all the people Catholic in Italy at the time of Francis? Yes, there was no question about that. Well, that doesn't mean that they were really fervently practicing the gospel, but there was no alternative. It was just a done deal. Europe is Catholic, period. And she was asking if at the time of Francis, the people, the peasants, the laborers were connecting religion with nature. I'm not so sure that they were connecting religion with nature. At the time of Francis, they were connecting religion, being a Christian, with the humanity of Jesus. That is a time that they're really focusing on if God wanted to be human in Jesus, it must mean that as human beings, we have divine value. And I think we're not finished with that talk. The value of human being. Francis was very much, in his writings, it comes, there is a beautiful text saying that, repeating that we have been created as in the image of God and the likeness, the similitude of Jesus. It's central in his life. And I would say, if we would value all human life today, the world would be very different.
Man.
Are some people more human than others? If they are, it's probably not in being respected, but the opposite. And this is where the Franciscan movement still has something to say. And I say the Franciscan movement is a lay movement, it's a movement, and it's inclusive. If there are conditions to be part of it, it's a reference to Francis and then Clare of Assisi and living that. I've had students who are Hindu, and they totally connected with the Franciscan contact. And they say, can I be a Hindu and a Franciscan? I said, well, do you see any opposition, anything in the Franciscan part that doesn't go with the Hindu? And I say, no. Well, I say, let's keep together what is together. Let's not put divisive labels. We are human beings. Let's be beautiful.
Ah.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
See you in 2 weeks.
Yes.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Mm, bye.
You're welcome.
Bye.
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 Au revoir.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Leave. Okay.